Here we go again, Lawrence. It's the Squeaky Wheel. Welcome, folks. I'm the captain, Ross Memphis Pambrun, and with me, as always, my very good friend, Lawrence, the President Gervais. Lawrence, it happens to be National Women's Health and Fitness Day, and it also happens to be the International Week of the Deaf.
Oh, interesting.
I don't think we have the funding at this time, and it is a shame because I always actually quite enjoy seeing when they have the support for the deaf, when they have people talking with their hands.
Yeah.
And we don't have that. No. You know, if we find you need that actually for listening to us here on the Squeaky Wheel, you should send us a message because that's actually quite important. I'm sure that we could get some supportive funding if for that part of our Indigenous conversation.
Well, I guess that there's probably is a grant out there for broadcasting that.
Of course, that means one more person to have to manage you and I.
Yeah.
Because you know they're the ones who are going to have to manage us. But yeah, so our thoughts are always with the people of Ukraine. Our thoughts are with all of the challenges that are happening with some of the violence throughout the world. And we have, again, our conversation about this as we try to find new ways to always support women's fitness, women's sports, and have that conversation. Because, you know, the success of our women's hockey teams as of late, you know, the World Cups are coming up. We're starting to see, again, there's always such good, better coverage now of women's sport.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think they had that NBA all televised all weekend. Oh,
right.
Sorry, the WNBA.
The WNBA, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's getting there. And hopefully they can draw an audience and pay their athletes, right?
Well, there you go. That's it. How do we pay our athletes? We have Orange Shirt Day coming up, Lawrence. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, that, you know, when this comes out, I think it's on Friday. Orange Shirt Day was certainly Phyllis Webstad's story about her going her first day of school at a mission school, and they kind of took the orange shirt away from her. Mm-hmm. And she always had that memory of, you know, every time she would see the color orange, it always reminded her that those students didn't matter, those in residential school survivors, right? So that was just as a reminder for us to always wear the orange shirt that day, and signifying, you know, that relationship to that color too. And that's that kind of story. Well,
and it's the relationship, but it's a trigger, right? We have words that are triggers now as well. And in this case, what a negative trigger to have that, you know, anytime it seems now, if you want to try to be different, you're ostracized for it, but our community is becoming a bit more woke now where we're starting to allow. And I've run into situations where, you know, younger students have said to me, I'm interested in wearing something Indigenous, but what am I allowed to do, or what's safe to do? And I always explain, get involved in your community. And when you see what other people are doing, you will start to find comfort in that. If you see somebody wearing a sash, you may find comfort in that. If you see the colored ribbon dresses, or the, you know, how people may style their hair in relation to culture and identity, you start to, you know, be involved, and you start to find comfort.
Yeah, I mean, these symbols always have a story to them, right? And it's all about, if you don't know, well, then you ask an elder or you go through that ceremony, and you'll understand what significant these items are. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty much, you know, how we go through that process of culture and living. But it is symbols. And, you know, orange shirt just reminds us of, certainly, and it's something new to even society itself. This is a new day that we have to go to events for. And it's just as busy now as it was just for Aboriginal Day. Right now we're just as busy going to 4 or 5 events a day and talking about, you know, possible survivors' stories, but not going to full length, because if you do that, you don't have that controlled environment too much. Like, when the TRC was happening across Canada, they did have a really very strong controlled environment where elders were present, counselors were present, those type of things. And I would hate to go to an event and all of a sudden open a mic to a survivor to tell his story without some type of support around, right?
Very good point.
Because people there, obviously their emotions were going to run high, and who knows what, you know, may happen, right? So, you know, and, you know, I'm attending some very controlled environments and a little bit of uncontrolled, but I always remind them that it's okay for us to acknowledge the survivors, but once you get into those truths, we have to be very, very careful at the same time.
Well, and you have to allow that person to lead the conversation. We don't, when you're talking to somebody, we don't want to put our opinions or our unawareness on their history, right? Everybody's journey through residential schools, through school, through their relationships with the church, and sort of systemic racism. It's a different journey for everybody, but we have to allow them to tell the story and feel supported.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, both my parents were in day school. And then, my grandmother was she was in a residential school, and she talked about the devil's hand and, what that kind of meant for us. And what viewers don't know is the devil's hand just meant, she was left-handed naturally. So the nuns had tied her left arm so she would write with her right. But, that was a normal thing. And for us to look at it now, to see, even picture a 6-year-old going through something like that.
Wow. Yeah.
Or picture a 6-year-old saying goodbye to their family and only seeing them twice a year, right?
Yeah, if they're lucky.
That's right. And residential schools was like that. And also the neglect and the abuse. And that's what we're seeing today in terms of the burial sites.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them are getting sick, and a lot of the schools weren't really operating properly. And the government was warned, and they just went to deaf ears too, right?
And I guess that's the important part of wearing the shirt. We're celebrating as a culture, but we're also recognizing a history, a very challenging history, and extending that. To me, it's a bit of an olive branch to the community. You can ask.
Yeah, for sure.
Ask, because this is how we're going to best share the awareness. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hence the reason why I decided to go without a blazer today. I'm trying something different. I thought, you know what? I have one. I could throw it on, but you know what? We're going to be dressed up pretty hard next week for our 100th podcast. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to treat myself and wear a fabulous sweater today.
Yeah, I mean, we're hitting 99. I hope the viewers, whatever small viewership.
Yeah, like the 5 or 3 people that watch.
Actually get something out of this. Mm. But at the end of the day, we're just sort of the gatekeepers. Hopefully there's going to, and I've always said this from the very beginning, we need more and more other communities to start doing podcasting and filming and all that. So everybody gets the whole landscape, and it's not just us here in Southern Alberta.
And try and expand their conversations within their own community. Absolutely. And though I'd like to see us and continue to have our conversations about different Indigenous groups and have a national awareness, you're right, we are down here, and it is important for us to hit on those. Let's talk a little bit about Constitution, because again, I know it's much like we need the reminders. Folks, in November is going to be your chance to vote. So you're going to have to get out there.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty excited. I mean, we're already seeing billboards going up about November, the big vote. And they're going to have, certainly planned cultural events in all the regions. So we're very excited to be a part of that. And then also encouraging our members to get out there and get registered and do what they need to. And
are we on a billboard anywhere?
No.
If any of you are putting up any billboards and you're thinking you want to add us, just let us know. We'll send you some images.
But I mean, it is important for our Métis Nation citizens to get forward and really focus on what that Constitution will look like, because I don't think we've ever had a significant vote that I know of other than our elections, and to be this large. So.
Right. This is the one that's impacting everybody in our province. So yes, make sure you get out and vote. Fun thing I was reading about for the Inuit community was the Calm Air, which is one of the airlines. There was a young girl, Doris Ipili. She was she met a pilot years and years ago, and was sort of, this person had shared with her, you could fly a plane one day. She was 7 years old at that fateful meeting. Now she's just graduated from flight school, nearly 2 months of rigorous training with this one specific airline. And she is an Inuk pilot from Iqaluit, and she's flying for her home territory.
Interesting.
I mean, these aren't huge planes, but these are where you get the experience, right? We don't have the huge planes that are flying back and forth, but the more time you can spend in that cockpit and you get that awareness, that skills, you know, and then you get to decide, is it time to move to a bigger airline? Maybe we should start flying 737s into a quality, but I don't know how many are going up there right now.
Well, I think if you live in those areas, those rural areas, all you do is fly. It's not like you can take a boat or drive anywhere, right? You have to take a plane. So
if you want to go see the Blue Jays, you're not taking a boat.
So I think a lot of them in that community, those communities, are aware of flight, right? But now they're going to be in the controls. So.
Yeah, I think it's such a great story. It seemed like this was a long journey for her to finally grow up to the point where then she could get her pilot's license.
Yeah, and it's not
since 7.
It's not a first for us as Métis. I mean, we have a Métis woman who owns her own airline company here in Alberta, and then we have, I think there was a whole Air Canada flight, pilots and crew that were all Métis.
Really?
They did a historic flight. I think it was from Calgary to Winnipeg and back, right? Yeah. So the cabin crew, serving your coffee.
Yeah.
And then as well as the pilots, yeah.
I've actually been on a WestJet plane once where the CEO was serving me coffee. It's funny, he just, I can't remember which one it was, but he said they take their turns. If they're in the air, they will take their turn. And it's much appreciated. And I explained, in the world that I work in, that role of leadership, I'm not afraid to do anything. I will do any role within that department.
Yeah.
Yeah, within our city department, so that everybody realizes that there's no hierarchy when it comes to the work, but there are times where I have to do this work. This is somebody else's.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Siksika Nation has reached a deal with the provincial and federal governments to reinstate the First Nations self-administered police service after 20 years. The agreement follows a historic settlement with the federal government that provided $1.3 billion in compensation to Siksika to resolve outstanding land claims. Now, I'm all for, right, that sort of self-management. But I think, if you look at the history of how challenging it is for the RCMP, and maybe they didn't make it, hopefully this becomes a better system. Maybe the RCMP didn't do the work. The city police, the challenges that policing have, and now policing within your own community, I'm all hoping this goes fabulous and it becomes by hopefully connecting community, they work to come up with solutions that work for them on how to protect their community. But that seems like a big step to take.
Yeah, I mean, your community is that large, you kind of need those response times just a little bit better. And sometimes maybe the RCMP are over here.
Yeah,
and they're kind of drawing away from that community, but having your own nation police is important, and it fills that gap in that role. Satina's been doing it for a while. Mm-hmm. Satina, I think they do a bit of the city of Calgary now, right? That's close to the reserve.
True, and I have seen their trucks driving around. Yeah. I haven't read a lot about how that relationship works, but I think that's important, and then develop the relationships between the provincial and federal sort of officers so that they get a chance to work together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, Siksika, it seems like they're doing quite strong in terms of their business and everything. They're getting money from the government, which is great. And now they can fund stuff like this.
Well, in CP Rail, for example, they have their own.
Well, they've had their own for a while.
Yeah, for a long, long, long time.
Since 1885, when they laid that last spike, they needed somebody to protect the railroad, right?
Yeah, continue to monitor and protect the railroad.
But I think they've had that sort of parliamentary power since, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no shortage of that history of the railways. But I mean, they're trying to protect, what a phenomenal amount of land that they're trying to monitor. So hopefully these agencies, our big hope is that we have that better connection with our communities when we have, leadership roles like these police services, and hopefully they engage. Because I think a lot of times, I often run into this, we want the elders to engage with the youth, but we have to put the events together that allow that to happen. Mm-hmm. And we need, agencies like these police services and the protection services to work with the community, right? They have a role, but we also need them to work with the community, talk, and find out where the issues are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in mediation and alternative measures and taking the court system away and sort of those institutionalized systems away from the Indigenous community and let them police ourselves and let us deal with those first-time offenders.
And consequences, you're right,
That's
actions.
right. And doing it through ceremony is a very, very vital thing.
And it brings that connection back to the community and focuses the connection back on the community rather than pushing it out of the community and handing it over to the province or the federal government to say, well, let's let these random people over here decide.
Yeah, and a lot of courts agree with it. I mean, to be quite honest, Alberta courts, they don't want to deal with absolutely everything because they get crunched too.
Right.
And a community can deal with things on their own, and those judges can be happy with that sort of solution. Well, then everybody wins.
Yeah, it doesn't bottleneck as much stuff.
Yeah.
A Niagara area school auditing its materials because there was a teacher who's facing some undisclosed disciplinary action after a student was sent home with a worksheet depicting 2 cartoon characters in stereotypical Indigenous clothing, including feathered headbands. So this parent was shocked when her 4-year-old came home. And what it was, and I looked at the picture, there's just 2 cute little, now that's somehow going to be offensive, little Indian characters, young kids with headband and just sort of one feather sticking out. And they're eating ice cream. And this is how you wanted to eat ice cream as a kid, right? Where there's like 10 stacks of ice cream on top of each other and each one of them had a letter in it. And the purpose of it is when you're looking at these big stacks of ice cream is to circle the eye. And I think that the document itself was sort of 2 little Indians are eating ice cream. It asks the student to color the scoops that have an eye in it. But I guess the issue, Lawrence, is, and I talk about this a lot, I don't find the term Indian offensive. I understand, and maybe we could talk about this, its connotation when it comes to the government actions and the government legislation, the history. But, you can always put a hurtful term and you can use, I think, any word hurtfully. But I think this is a word that has been entrenched in our history. And is it right to remove it? Or there are better terms. But I don't even think here that the action was meant to be, if you're getting that hurt by this.
Well, we live in a very woke society now.
Yeah.
And I think that teachers probably should have been woke to understand that this is a term that it's a colonial term. It's a wrong term. Something that been used in the past. It's been used in slang, derogatory for many, many years too. And we have to be very extra careful on how we word the word Indian, right? And Indian Act is sort of some of the vernacular that the government is still using, and First Nations certainly don't want it to change either because it changes that whole treaty that whole relationship
Right.
without that government policy. So is it a bad term? Well, yeah. I mean, I do believe it is actually. And I think it's a wrong term to be using if you want to work with kids and kind of teach them the different ways.
But
just be extra careful on how you word things.
All my friends and everybody I know in Europe, and this I guess is maybe doesn't justify the argument, but they have identified or they're familiar with the term Indian in a proud, positive sense. They're unaware of the notion of the Indian Act. Their history had been familiar with that the Indian was a proud person, spiritual, respect the land. Do we have, and is that the next extent of our responsibility? Is that a woke responsibility where we have to start telling, hey, overseas, stop using that word, learn another word. Again, I use it in a way, I don't use the term that often. I think the term Indigenous suits very well, but when people are in conversation, we have that. When you're in conversation, when you're asking about it, I don't think it's ever coming across disrespectfully. I tend to know when somebody's being disrespectful, well, then I'm done having a conversation. But here, I don't even think that this was necessarily there was no intent to be disrespectful, but I could be wrong.
Well, you could be, and we don't know her intent.
Right.
We don't know the intent of that teacher, and that's the part of the problem. Like if you live in Canada and you know that term is wrong, right? You kind of steer clear of it. And if you're in Europe or something like that, yeah, definitely. If the blanket's been on you for so many years, generationally, and you just come up with that word automatically. But if you've been in Canadian society for this long and have gone to school and university, you kind of know Aboriginal, Indigenous are probably the better terms to be using.
I look and I go, well, how old is the documents? I think I almost even remember these things from being a kid, right? This picture where you're supposed to circle these words. And does somebody not look at this and go, boy, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't. Like maybe I shouldn't hand this out with these two little, native Indian children in this picture. You think you might just take a step back.
Yeah, but for me, when Indian to me growing up meant Christopher Columbus' mistake of him thinking he was in India.
Right.
So then I thought, okay, well then they moved to Aboriginal. And I thought, well, Aboriginal is dumb too, because what are they telling us? You're not original?
Yeah.
Like, you're abnormal, you're not Aboriginal?
Yeah, Aboriginal seemed like an odd term.
So Indigenous came. And I thought, okay, well, it's kind of a hard word to use, but it actually is a little bit better than Indian and Aboriginal to me. So I'd rather use Indigenous.
And I like Indigenous because it's sort of that you were part of the land originally. Aboriginal seems
not original.
Yeah, not original or original, but much the idea, the notion of the savagery that colonialism has seemed to identify. Well, these are Aboriginal people. They're just Indigenous to the land. That is a better term. I like that.
But I mean, half-breed, like the half-breed commission, script commission was put in place for them to extinguish our land title. But it was called the half-breed script commission.
Right.
Right. But back then we probably were closer to being half-breeds. Not like now.
No, generationally could be a little bit longer. So you're right.
Then terms change over time.
Yeah, the term changes because then it's what we're going to start saying: quarter breed, 1/8 breed, like that. Yeah, that.
Or just call us breeds, which is more offensive.
Then it's even more offensive. Yeah, you're categorizing everybody just under one identity. No, you're right. But again, now here's another opportunity where I hope that the conversation happens at that school board, saying, we have the time, where we have the parents or we have the school. Let's look at some of the materials before they're handed out.
Yeah, or it's always good to connect to elders. I think every school should have some type of connection, whether it's an elder or a knowledge holder that can kind of come in and go, yeah, maybe we skip that in the curriculum and focus on this instead, right? Because we don't want to get our younger kids go, oh yeah, Indian, this, and you know what I mean? Then they go into a different circle and all of a sudden they look as, well, they're going to start getting bullied, or maybe they use that term in a bully fashion. Who knows?
True, but somehow at some point somebody's going to find something wrong with the term Indigenous, and we're going to have to look at a different word, or we will go back to where people want to create more awareness of the different culture, the different identities.
Yeah.
And hopefully we will continue then to figure out a way to celebrate it. And maybe that's it. It's just the constant, working for awareness.
Yeah, I mean, we know about sports teams because that's always on our minds: Eskimos, Redskins, the Braves.
Indians,
But if a community comes to you and you're the owner of those teams and goes, "Hey, I got a problem with this term," well, it might be a good idea to listen to that.
Listen to them, or figure out a way to work to celebrate the term together.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or what the story of Redskins was. What is it? Nobody knows, other than people maybe using that as a racist term later on, right?
Yeah. Or later on. I don't know. It doesn't sound like that was the original intent, because from what I understand, it was a First Nation group that had applied that, but then it somewhat connotatively became a negative term, or it was perceived as it.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And over time, just people, in bars or school on the playground will use those terms to get you all riled up, right?
Right. Same reason I call you co-host. Somehow, someday that's going to be offensive. Well, you can't. He's the host, second, partial, shared role, not co. Okay, well, we'll figure that one out when the time comes. Murray Sinclair has many titles, former judge, senator, head of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation. Just recently got a bronze bust of his likeness and now sits alongside other prominent Manitobans in, I think it's in Winnipeg. And this was unveiled as one of the roles of head of Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Yeah, I think he's even done work at Manitoba Métis Federation years ago before he became a judge. So he knows our Métis community.
He's got a long history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, he's done a lot of work.
I guess he wouldn't necessarily be the first senator. We've talked about that before. No. Sometimes we have no idea of the awareness of who were senators in the past.
Senator Richard Hardesty, I think, was the first Indigenous senator, but he was the senator back in Riel's time, like 1870, right?
Yeah, and who knows who was around there before or what stories they haven't told about their history. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, and he was one of the ones that is connected to the Lougheed line, and we know that story. First premier, Indigenous premier of Alberta was Métis.
Right.
Peter Lougheed.
Yeah.
So, but Richard Hardesty, his line was always the chief factors in the Hudson's Bay Company, so that the heads, the bosses. So, of course, he was just natural to go in line as being a Canadian senator.
Right, and that's the role he encompassed rather than the, hey, look at me, I'm Métis. You know, I don't know what his journey was at the time. Hurricane Fiona, lots of eastern damage. Right. You know, it's hard. We all have snow shovels here.
Yeah.
Do all those people down there just keep 50 extra sheets of plywood because they know the hurricanes? Because there's been a lot of damage. And is it a climate change thing? Are we seeing increased sizes of hurricanes?
I have no idea. I'm not an expert. I mean, we had a lot of smoke one year. This year we didn't have too much.
Well, you weren't an expert at smoke, but now you're talking about that. I mean,
yeah. Well, I'm saying is that the environment is changing.
You're right.
But then it kind of goes back to normal again. It's like this fluctuating system. But is it normal? I don't think so. Maybe the hurricanes are going to get worse.
It seems like those were big ones, and our thoughts are with all of those families who are trying to put their lives back together.
Well, they're probably still trying to get power.
Yeah. So they're probably not watching this week. But if you can watch it on your phone, make sure you watch the Squeaky Wheel wherever you are on your phone. And you can find us on all the different podcast medias, and you can find us on YouTube. So make sure you click that subscribe button, folks, that little red button. It means a lot to us. It's nice to see those numbers as they go up. Confirmed for the Super Bowl, Rihanna.
Interesting.
The thing I find will be interesting is she came here a few years ago, started her concert 3 hours late.
She probably won't get that past there.
I don't think she'd get that past the Super Bowl.
Or she'll forget about it.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting.
But a superstar, right? And I'm not as familiar with all of her music, but you can't not see social media without knowing that Rihanna is a big part of the music world.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't really know her music too much. And I was making that comment before we started and we were talking about this. And, you know, Metallica is always the Enter Sandman, no players are coming out.
Right.
And then, you know, Guns N' Roses, sometimes that sweet Child of Mine, you know, riff comes out. Or, you know, like AC/DC, some of their songs. But none of three of those bands ever played the Super Bowl. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
And so
there's such influences when it comes to that energy, but yet they've never played the Super Bowl.
I think they should. But I mean, I liked the Dr. Dre performance last year.
Oh, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I liked what they did and the messaging. A lot of fun. I know I'll probably try and send her my latest song,
Rihanna?
Highway of Dreams. Yeah, maybe she could play that at the Super Bowl. So Rihanna, or if you know Rihanna, could you have her play my latest song, Highway of Dreams by Memphis and the Grand? Just let her know that she's welcome to play it. Blue Jays, Lawrence.
Yes.
It sounds like we're this close, or we may actually have a playoff spot.
I think we definitely have. We're going to be playing for the wild card.
Minimum.
You know that.
Yeah.
And then we're probably playing Tampa Bay, they are fantastic pitchers.
Yeah.
We were pretty lackluster on the pitcher side.
And we just we split that series 2-2.
But we beat them on the hitting side.
Yeah.
And the defensive side. But they definitely have those pitchers, right?
There's, how many games do you figure we have left? 15?
Yeah, I think we're at a dozen now.
Yeah, a dozen.
Yeah.
So, you know, sports, we could spend the day talking about sports, Lawrence, but I like to always finish a little bit of our show just with a bit of that connection, because hockey's on its way around.
Yeah.
We know our community likes, supporting our own sports and our own arts.
And I looked at ticket prices. They haven't changed that much. They got to change those prices.
If any of you want to donate tickets to Lawrence and Ross for the rest of the season, you just let us know. So, Lawrence, thank you again. As always, it's always a fun conversation. Folks, make sure you capture next week or our next podcast, the 100 that's coming out, because we have a big celebration. And if you start watching some of our social medias, you're going to see that information that's coming out. From everybody behind the scenes, from Devin, from Leighton, from our publicist and the roles that everybody in our community helps to support us. Thank you, as always. Keep the wheels squeaking. Make sure you watch to find out when it's time to vote, and stay within your community and be supportive. Thank you kindly. Best wishes. The Squeaky Wheel is brought to you by the Squeaky Wheel Company, co-hosted by the President, Lawrence Gervais, MMA Region 3, and the Captain, Ross Memphis Pambrun. Our program is broadcast from Calgary, in Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta, which is part of the historic Métis Nation homeland. We also acknowledge these lands are the traditional territories of Treaty 7, Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda, with whom we share this land on the basis of our historical and ongoing relationships. You can always reach us for comment about our programming by email at tsw@thesqueakywheel.ca, or find us on our website, www.squeakywheel.ca, and our socials. For our comments, it is our focus to recognize all of our First Nations and Indigenous friends, share connection with Métis settlements, and listen to and show respect to our Métis brothers and sisters and families. Here at the Squeaky Wheel, we give thanks to our elders for their guidance and to Mother Earth for her time she allows us to be here and share her bounty. From all of us at the Squeaky Wheel, Tansi.